Welcome, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here with me today. Oh, Clay Center has such a special place in my heart, and many memories were made here, and many friends too. I hope you don't mind if I use notes today, because there's so many dates and so many things to remember, so I have them written down just so I don't forget. Our stories were very similar. We were people who loved adventure and loved the luring promise of the Western frontier, and so many of us came over. But I get ahead of myself. I was born in Biel, Switzerland in February the 17th of 1851. And every morning I woke to the view of the foothills of the Swiss Alps. My husband-to-be, Carl, he was also born in Switzerland, but he was born in 1833 or 34, something like that. So he was 18 years my senior. He had a strong desire, even stronger than mine, for adventure and the promise of economic opportunities here in the U.S. And so shortly after we were married, he went and came here and left me in Switzerland, where our daughter was born after he left. I remained in Biel, and Carl immigrated to here, and that was in 1869. No, it would have been 1868. It would have been 1868. And he came to Manhattan, Kansas, and there he met Dr. Samuel Weithorn. Now, Dr. Samuel Weithorn, he was a pharmacist, and so he taught Carl the American pharmaceutical system when he came. Well, they both had this desire to open a drugstore in a small frontier town that they thought would grow. And so, but they needed two important conditions to be met before they did that. One was a good transportation in the area, good transportation, and the other was a good source of water. Clay Center met those two. Streams emptied into the nearby Republican River, and the Fort Riley-Fort Kearny military route came right by the area. There were also rumors of a railroad following that route. Sam and Carl opened, it was a 12-foot by 14-foot log cabin made of cottonwood, and it was known as the Sawyer Building. It was located on the street that would become Lincoln Avenue. Now, Sam and, things happen, and Sawyer sold his land claim. So then Carl had a decision to make, and he actually had a vision for having his own drugstore. So he separated from Dr. Weithorn. And Carl then claimed lot number 8, block 42, and it was just east of the log cabin store. He named it the Union Drug Store. It was a wooden structure, and materials were made. It was made of materials that were available in the area. These wooden structures were called stands. And later, I have some pictures so you can see what it looks like. In August of 1869, the Kansas Pacific Railroad determined that the Fort Riley-Fort Kearny Road would be most advantageous to develop the area in the county. Excitement ran high. There were rumblings of Clay Center becoming like the bustling city of Chicago. After a time, in 1873, he was granted a quitclaim deed for the lot. Interesting enough, he put it in my name. Unusual for the time, and just as our marriage was rather unusual. Carl was a respected and caring man, and like many of the other merchants in the area, extended credit to his customers. There was no local bank here at the time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Baby Lady and I are still back in Switzerland in 1868, and so we journeyed to Switzerland actually in 1870. So it took a little while. It was the first time I would see my property. But at last, in 1874, due to some intricacies and legalities that I never understood, ownership reverted back to Carl. We arrived to a town, and we're now back in 1870. We arrived back to a town that had grown to 50 residents by now. And it was a bustling little place of 30 or 40 buildings. There were 3 general stores now. There was a lumber yard and a boarding house, and of course, the Union Drugstore. Street addresses did not exist for some time, and so many of the other businesses advertised their business as how it related to the Holzgang building. In 1872, Clay Center was incorporated as a town. Interesting enough, there had been a United States Postal Office there since 1862. The first newspaper was printed in 1871. I assisted Carl in the business daily and mostly saw to the women's needs. Oh, how I loved serving our women customers. Carl was quite an inventor of concoctions of medicinal value. At that time, medicines were druggist mixed compounds. So the druggist mixed them right there. You didn't get them from a store or from, a wagon bringing them in. We had coughs, compounds, and nervium, which is nervous affections, and we had salves for hands and feet, and blood purifying teas, and children's diarrhea powder. The creations were not just for people, though. They were also for horses and cattle. And he had created medicines for them, too. Coughs and worm medicines and colic medicines. Our business expanded as the town was. Our inventory now had garden seeds and seed potatoes and old wallpaper and moldings and picture frames and groceries and heating oil and tobacco products. We also featured alcohol. Carl delighted in concocting whiskey for his customers to buy. At the time, it was quite legal. Our business was growing and we needed help. So Mr. R.T. Carr, he was employed and he helped us with our expanding inventory and services and customers. Carl was quite the entrepreneur, so he purchased a photography business to add to our services. It was perfect for him because he loved to mix chemicals. He also invested did you know there was a Kansas silkworm industry? Yes, he also invested in that. Silkworms, cocoons, and all. He was also into real estate, and he did quite well. How he had time to do all this, I do not know. Carl's health was struggled all of his life. And so, in May of 1878, he sold the store. And he sold the Holzgang formulas to Clark and Bloss. Clay Center was now a population of 1,200. And Clark and Bloss was rather short-lived. 1 month after its inception, Clark left for Tennessee. So it became H.H. Bloss and Sons. Carl was procured as the chemist. And one of the Mrs. Blosses opened a seamstress shop above the store. Well, in February of 1879, because that was in 1878, this is in February of 1879, we were once against the owners. And we returned it to the Union Drugstore. Carl's health had returned. And with that, he decided to expand and lengthen the building, and so construction began. He drilled a well so we would have source on water on site, and he also has put up gas lights on the outside of the building. Well, that was 1879. 1880, there was another major change. Carl felt the need for a storefront with large windows so he could lure the customers in. So we moved the business down, a few doors east, and renamed it Pioneer Drug and Store. He transferred the ownership of the stand to me, and I leased the stand to other businesses in the area. I also became a licensed druggist. Those are two amazing advances for women in that time period. And if that wasn't enough, Lida and I went to Switzerland that year for almost a year. Well, back here we had celebrations and dances and parties. They were a large part of our lives. We hosted social activities in our home and at the store. Religious activities were also of a high place in our lives, and we held the first Roman Catholic services in our home. In 1883, Lida went to Leavenworth to St. Mary's Academy. She was only 14 years old. Now, if Carl had not done enough changing, he had another one up his sleeve. In the winter of 1885, he went to Florida. He was checking out the glowing promise of investment in fruit crops. He went also to seek a better climate for his health. He had been close to death with a bout of asthma that fall. He returned in 86 in good health and the owner of an orange plantation. His visits to Florida became longer, more frequent. By this time, Clay Center had a trolley system for public transportation. Did you know that? In 87, Lida returned home. In the fall of 87, Carl sold the business to me. So I replaced the wooden structure back on Lot 8 into a 2-story brick building. We started in October, and we returned the store to its original location upon completion. The store, it was the second to the last to become a brick building. And I spared no expense. The storefront was very distinctive. And we had a sidewalk, a flagstone, and an eagle decorating the corners up above. The following month, Carl left for Florida, never to return. For 16 years, I had worked by his side. And I'd been making business decisions for many years now. Lida and I now lived above the store. There was an apartment there. It was perfect for entertaining. And so we hosted many a party above the store. In 1890, I filed for divorce. It provided economic protection for me, and in the case of if he had losses in his investments, I would not be liable for them anymore. Little girls, as you know, are not little girls forever. And in 1890, Lida married. His name was James Myers. James invested in the hardware side of the store. And I took the newlyweds for 4 months to Switzerland before we returned back here to Clay Center. Prior to leaving, I had sold the inventory of the drugstore to Mr. McIntyre, so I was free to enjoy the trip in Switzerland. On our return in September, I worked for Mr. McIntyre as his druggist, and until James and I reestablished the Pioneer Drug and Hardware Store. It was now under the name of Holzgang and Company. This was in 1891. Are you keeping track of all these years and all these things happening in all these years? Okay. Now, my life was not one to remain the same for long, as you already see and already know. James took a job in New Mexico that year, and he and Lida moved away. Later, they would move to Kansas City, and I could visit them on occasion. I had hired licensed pharmacists by now because I needed some help. And this allowed me to return to my homeland again in 1894. I've been back 3 times in those years. The next year, I bought out James's interest in business, and I became the sole proprietor. 2 years later, the former mayor of Clay Center and I, John C. Johnston, we married. I ran Pioneer Drug on the east side, and he ran the hardware store on the west. We lived in an apartment above, and we hosted many a charitable party. You can tell I like to host parties. I really do. They were a great delight of my life. In the spring of 1902, I knew that it was time to retire. I was now 50 years old. And I was weary of the duties of running a business. There had been so many changes. So I sold the Pioneer Drug to Mr. J.W. Covert. I still owned the building. John continued to run the hardware part of the store. And at Covert's request, we put a partition in between the two businesses. Well, on September 12th, a fire broke out. The building was saved. This was in the drugstore side. The drugstore merchandise was ruined. Covert was well insured, but he decided to sell it back to me. So once again, I was the registered owner of it all. I partnered with Mr. Axel Carlson. He was a pharmacist, and we did business under the name of B. Johnston and Company. And try to keep this all straight of what this was called all through the years. Oh my goodness. And we continued to host the parties and charitable fundraisers up in our living room above our business. And the papers described our home as elegantly furnished. I do have a flair for the elegant. 7 years after our marriage, John left. He took a job as a traveling salesman, and he was never to return. Before he left, he had sold the hardware business to Bill Keeble. Now, I continued to run the drugstore. That had happened since 1870. Oh my goodness. Into 1906, but I knew that it was time to go. So I sold the business to Lee Gramley that same year. He was a player and manager of the Clay Center semi-professional baseball team. Did you know the Clay Center had a semi-professional baseball team? They did. I continued to own the business, but I moved to Kansas City so I could be near my daughter and my granddaughters. I was still a landlord, and it had its headaches, but it gave me reason to return back to see my friends in Clay Center. Well, in 1907, there was a second fire, but it wasn't destroyed again. I was the owner until 1917. I finally gave up responsibilities of ownership to Mrs. Aldiff. Clay Center continued to grow, but I was not to return again. My death was in 1933. Ownership in businesses that were within for the years, it's kind of, we've had a hard time figuring out what has been there in some of the years since. Maybe some deep research into some of those newspapers could find the answers. In 1946, the telephone directory places Reliable Appliance Company next door at 414. We were 412 and 412 and a half. 1955, the Hosmer Sheet Metal was listed at 414 Lincoln. But in 1970, Hosmer Sheet Metal is listed at 414 and 412. We did find a little bit out. Well, in 1975, and many of you will remember this or know of them, Hosmer's became Potency and Son Heating and Cooling, and was there until just 3 years ago, 2021. Oh, the Ogrando building, which was known as the Holzgang building for many years, is a tribute to the pioneers that settled and built Clay Center. Many who immigrated from across the waters to call this land their own, like me. Thank you. And I